Good afternoon. 2 Timothy, the 4th chapter, 6 through the 8th verses. I am already being poured out as a libation, and the time of my departure has come. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. From now on, there is reserved for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me on that day. And not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing. My name is Reverend Katrina Jenkins, and I serve as the Dean of Religious Life at Rollins College. We are here to celebrate the life and legacy of Dr. Thaddeus Seymour, 12th president of Rollins College. On behalf of the Rollins family, I would like to extend our sincere sympathy to the Seymour family. The scripture that I read sums up why many of us are gathered here today. Thad dedicated his life to making ours better. He quietly lived out his faith, finished his race strongly, and now rests in the arms of a loving God. Please know that while this is a celebration, it does not mean that we can't be sad about losing Thad. Rather, this service gives us an opportunity to laugh, to cry, and reflect on a man who came into the world in love and left surrounded by love. Please join me in a moment of prayer. Most gracious God, I thank you for this service and the time we are about to spend together celebrating Thad. Thank you for a life lived so richly. Give the family the grace and space to grieve their loss. May they feel the love at this very moment from all of us. May everything that is said and done in this service be pleasing in your sight. Amen. We will now have words of tribute by President Grant Cornwell, and this will be followed by a musical meditation.
Well, good afternoon and welcome. What an honor that we gather to celebrate the life of such a fine man. I have a question for you. Has anyone in this chapel ever met a man more optimistic and encouraging than Thad Seymour? Has anyone in this chapel met someone who could be more cheerful and stern at the same time? Does anyone in this chapel know a couple as well-matched, mutually supportive, or deeply caring as Thad and Polly? Has anyone ever known a man who could weather hardship and difficulty without the slightest diminution of his spirit? In the recent video by the Winter Park Health Foundation, Thad simply says, in a manner both profound and earnest and so deeply characteristic, I am grateful for everything. We're here to celebrate that man and to count our blessings for having known him. I am sure in this I am joined by two former presidents of Rollins College in attendance today, Dr. Rita Bornstein and Dr. Lewis Duncan. I know we're grateful for having shared this time and space with such a beautiful soul. President Thaddeus Seymour's academic pedigree comported with the best. Undergraduate study at Princeton University and the University of California, Berkeley, master's and doctoral degrees in English from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. At the age of 30, he was tapped to move from teaching at Dartmouth to becoming its dean of the college. Among his notable successes at Dartmouth was coaching the rowing team to victory in the Dad Vale Regatta in his first year, beating Rollins by 3 inches. At the advanced age of 40, he stepped into his first college presidency, His 9 years at Wabash College in Crawfordsville, Indiana, left a deep impression on the students who passed through campus. From the Sons of Wabash, a group of 40 alumni who continued to get together regularly, were sent these thoughts, and I quote, "In a period of generational estrangement, he represented a father figure, Dad Thad. He made us all better. And having now spent 4 decades contemplating the impact of the years we shared with the Seymours at Wabash, we have come to realize that the joy we recognize as Wabash was largely the manifestation of their presence." In 1978, he came to Rollins to leave a similarly deep impression on our history. He recommitted the college to its foundation in the liberal arts, winning grants from the National Endowment for the Humanities for writing and for classics, from the Olin Foundation for a new library. The college introduced the first Master of Liberal Studies degree in the state of Florida. One of the things that Thad and I share, and there are many, more than simply a love for this fine college, is a belief that it can be better than it is. As president of Rollins, Thad called upon us to our core mission, being the rigorous study of the liberal arts and sciences. Thad inherited a college that had a lot of problems to solve, and he went about those tasks without ever losing focus on the centrality of that mission. But Thad, as we all know, was also about fun. What better way to break in the new Alphon Stadium at Harper Shepherd Field than an exhibition game with the world champion Pittsburgh Pirates? Or to celebrate the rededication of the college's oldest building, Pinehurst College, by portraying Edward Payson Hooker, Rollins' first president, in period dress, complete with a top hat and a mustache. Or, of course, Thad's love of magic and the delight in performing it. Now, speaking from experience, I know that college presidents can use magic now and then. Always for the good, of course, though I must admit there are days when some of the dark arts would come in handy too. And let us not forget that Thad brought back Fox Day. I think I'm grateful for that. But really, Fox Day embodies so much we love about Thad. A sense of the importance of traditions, a belief that playfulness and wholesome fun are also what both life and college are about, and an ability to combine seriousness of purpose without taking ourselves too seriously. Perhaps, though, most memorable was Thad's fondness for random acts of kindness. When he saw an unsuspecting member of the Rollins community perform a good deed, something as simple as picking up a piece of trash from the sidewalk, he would surprise them with a silver dollar. Now I have in my hand an authentic Thad Seymour silver dollar. It's an Eisenhower silver dollar from 1978, and if one didn't know better, one would think it might be Thad himself. The coin was a reward for selfless service, just as Thad and Polly invested their selfless service in our community. Thad helping to found a Habitat for Humanity chapter here, and Polly starting the Winter Park Public Library's New Leaf bookstore. Speaking personally, Thad and Polly have been nothing but generous and steadfast supporters of Peg's and my work since the moment we joined this community. What you might not know is that the College of Worcester, where I served as president before coming to Rollins, is in the same fiercely competitive athletic league as Wabash. We would often trade banter, and I remember once when I came over to Thad and Polly's to watch a live stream of a basketball game between Wabash and Worcester. It was a great contest. Wabash won. And in a way that is quintessentially Thad, I think he actually felt a little bad for me. And he went on and on about how good the Worcester team was. One of the things that I most deeply appreciate about the ethos of Rollins College is our unabashed belief that kindness matters. For me, as for so many, Rollins has two shining beacons of this ethos, this belief in kindness: Thad Seymour and Fred Rogers. To quote again our dear friend, "I'm grateful for everything, but I'm especially grateful for Thad." Now, I close with two very important announcements. Every year, during the week in which we honor the legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Rollins has an annual day of service. The service project involves students and faculty and staff and alumni, Upward Bound students, and community members. And service sites have included the Boys and Girls Clubs, the Wells Built Museum, and the Winter Park Day Nursery. The day concludes with a community picnic on campus. From this point forward, this day shall be called the Thad and Polly Seymour Day of Service. Applaud if you approve. Second, I'm sure you have taken notice as our forthcoming lakeside neighborhood of student residences and outdoor and indoor community spaces rise out of the ground. This project will be central to campus as it is central to our mission. It will house 500 students, but more importantly, its design and program will underscore our commitment to student well-being, mental health, and recreation. It will be comprised of 3 buildings, and I am pleased to announce a most fitting tribute. One of them shall bear the name Thaddeus Seymour Hall, so that his name shall be spoken by scores of students on a daily basis for decades to come, recalling his legacy of leadership at Rollins. Thank you.
We will now have words of tribute by Hal George, followed by Billy Collins, and that will be followed by another musical meditation.
Good afternoon. I wish I had some big announcement like President Cornwell, but I don't. When Thad asked me if I would speak at his memorial service, I told him I would do anything for him and that I would be happy to speak at the service. He then proceeded to tell me that it's just a hands-in-the-pocket speech. Now, a hands-in-the-pocket speech for Thad meant speaking from the heart, without notes, kind of by the seat of your pants, which is what we did a lot. After I left his house that day, I realized that I had not been truthful to my friend on 2 counts. First of all, I am not happy under these circumstances, and secondly, there is no way I could stand up here and talk about Thaddeus Seymour from the heart without turning this into an emotional train wreck that you all would have to witness uncomfortably until the more eloquent speakers came on after me. Therefore, I have chosen instead to read some of my disjointed and convoluted thoughts about Thad Seymour. I am here today heartbroken at the loss of a mentor, a best friend, a partner, a father figure, and an inspiration to me for over 30 years. I have made a choice to put these emotions aside for a moment and focus on some of the wonderful and positive aspects of Thad's life that I have witnessed and experienced with him. My recollections of Thad when he first came to Rollins was somewhat skeptical. I was told about this new president who rode around campus on a bicycle wearing a tie and tennis shoes, doing magic tricks and talking to all the students on campus. I thought to myself, this must be some kind of nut they've hired at Rollins. It didn't sound very presidential to me. Obviously, though, after you meet Thad and see his bigger-than-life persona and affable and fun-loving personality, you understand. I gradually got to know Thad through Rollins events and such, but my real bonding with him came when we embarked on our Habitat for Humanity adventure together nearly 30 years ago. We realized that we both shared a common love for the city of Winter Park and its wonderful community. We also saw the need in our community for affordable housing for needy families and an opportunity through Habitat to be more involved in providing a platform for volunteers to serve that need. So with a small group of people, we began to form what became the Habitat for Humanity of Winter Park and Maitland. Thad was the chairman from the beginning and remained in that role throughout. Thad and I would speak to groups at house groundbreakings and dedications, and he knew that I was terrified, and still am, to talk in front of a group of people. That's when he started telling me that we're just doing a simple hands-in-the-pocket speech, no big deal, at least not for him. Thad would always start the event with his big, booming voice, give an eloquent and articulate talk about Habitat, and then introduce me as the affiliate's president. He would always add into my introduction that I was a Rollins graduate, that I was an English major, and then he would proceed to tell the crowd that I was also president of a fraternity that was thrown off of campus. As I started my hands-in-the-pocket speech, I would have to inform the crowd that I was no longer attending Rollins when this happened, and that the president that threw the fraternity off the campus was Thad. He always seemed to enjoy our little banter and watching me squirm occasionally when he knew it was in my best interest. Thad Seymour was one of the most remarkable and well-respected men that I've ever met. To me, he was an inspiration to make myself a better person. By his own example, he showed me it is better to treat people with compassion and kindness and work together as opposed to needless bickering and arguing. Thad was an accomplished and very successful man in his career, but always kept a certain boyish and humorous demeanor in almost everything that he did. I have so many stories and examples of that, but I promised Polly and the family that I'd cut this down to 45 minutes, is what I agreed? Yeah. Thad Seymour was first and foremost a family man that loved his family and was so very proud of all of them and for each one's achievements. His partner and loving wife for 71 years, Polly, meant the world to him. Behind every cause and undertaking that Thad and Polly individually took on, the other one was right there to support and working just as hard. That was the case with Polly's passion and involvement with the Winter Park Library and starting the New Leaf bookstore. Thad was right there with her, sorting books, sending emails, designing websites. They did it together. The Capon House was another cause that Thad got behind and led the charge. And I also remember when Thad used to volunteer to drive elderly folks around town for doctor's appointments and such. I was kidding him one day, and I asked, Thad, do any of your passengers get a little anxious when they see that their driver is older than they are? And he smiled at me and said, some do, but at that point, they're out of options. While Thad was heavily involved with Habitat, Polly was also helping our families and making curtains for new homes and being such a wonderful part of all that we did. Thad and Polly taught me so much by the way that they respected, loved, and treated each other. Thad was very, very proud of all of his children and grandchildren and all their accomplishments as well. He was so proud of Mary and Abigail and Liz and talked about all the great things that they've done. And he and Polly delighted in sharing stories of Sam's work and his adventures and travels around the world. And of course, on the local home front, Thad just beamed when talking about Thad Jr. becoming president at UCF and all that T was involved in and doing out there. In fact, Thad became quite the UCF football fan of late and would try to watch the games wearing his UCF football jersey or his T-shirt. But he would sometimes get confused on what day the games were on and would ask if the game is tomorrow, and we would say, no, Thad, it's on Saturday. He would then ask the same thing the next day, and we'd say, no, it's tomorrow. And then I would come over after Habitat on Saturday, and Thad talked about how he was looking forward to the game that night, and he was going to rest so he could be up to see it. Well, I showed up on Sunday the next day. I came by to visit, and the first thing I asked was, Thad, did you see the game last night? He smiled and said, you know, my eyesight isn't great right now, and I watched these guys in black uniforms and white helmets and realized at the end of the game that I've been watching the wrong damn game. I watched Western Michigan beat somebody. It was funny moments like this that helped us through some of the difficult times. So now I stand here saying thank you to my friend for making me a stronger, better person, a kinder person, and challenging me to be a better person in everything I do and to always try to do the right thing. In honor of that, I challenge each one of us to be a little bit more compassionate and kind when dealing with one another. You may not change the world, but you just may change one person's world. Polly, Liz, Abigail, Sam, T, and all the whole Seymour family, you have my deepest sympathy for your loss. But I will tell you, from where I stand, you were all so very blessed by having Thaddeus in your lives. Thank you for letting me share Thad with you. Thad, I will miss you and will always love you. I said I wouldn't do that. And I will be eternally grateful for how you enriched my life. Thank you for trying to sneak one more hands in the pocket speech in on me. It didn't work. I read this one. God bless you, my friend.
Good afternoon. I first of all want to thank the Seymour family for inviting me to say a few words and contribute to this beautiful ceremony. I'm very honored to do that, especially because considering that I'm a relatively new friend of Thad's. I know there are many here that who knew Thad Seymour longer than I have, but let's face it, Thad was a pretty quick read. It only took a minute or two of exposure to the man to be pulled into the magnetic field of his spirited personality. To be in his company was to be enlightened and enlivened, and you couldn't help bring a little bit of his brightness away with you. In thinking about Thad this past week, a line from Wordsworth came to mind. We English majors can't help ourselves. The line is, "The child is father to the man." It's from a poem sometimes called The Rainbow, but better known by its opening lines. "My heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky. So it was when my life began, so it is now I am a man, so it be when I shall grow old." The phrase, "the child is father of the man," surprises us by reversing the normal order of the generations. It's shorthand for the poet's wish that his heart will continue to leap up in adulthood as it did in his childhood. The child will teach the man how to do this. You know where I'm going. There was a lot of child in the man Thaddeus Seymour. His enthusiasms were often as boisterous as a child's. If something caught his attention and interest, he was all in. His energy was contagious. "Come on with me," he seemed to be saying, like a benevolent Pied Piper. "You'll feel better about yourself if you get off the bench and onto the playing field." If he wasn't always delighted, who can be, he appeared always ready to be delighted. Like every child, he loved to play. I first discovered this after Thad asked Gail Sinclair and me to help him revive the old Rollins tradition of the animated magazine, dating back to the time of Hamilton Holt. One morning, without warning, he handed me a giant blue pencil about 4 feet long, a cartoon prop. Apparently, I had just been made the new editor, trusted to wield this pen as a symbol of my editorial authority. How appropriate, I remember thinking, that one of the most animated people I'd ever met was determined to reanimate the animated magazine. Thad, the overgrown, bigger-than-life boy. Joan Didion's doctor could just as well have been Thad's when he reported, quote, "Miss Didion has made an inadequate adjustment to aging." Another piece of writing came to mind last week, an essay by Pico Iyer. In it he writes that when we are young, men and women, we try to be different from everyone else, exceptional, or just odd for its own sake. Like the girl named Tiffany, who insisted that her name be spelled Typhanie. But as we grow older, Pico goes on, we find what is not exceptional in us, what we have in common with others, matters more. Anyone's real strength, he says, is only what unites her or him with everyone in shared experience. Thad was ever creating opportunities for shared experiences. Here is Thad Seymour, the man of the community, the smiling public man of W.B. Yeats. Only Thad did more than smile. He beamed. Here is Thad who connected so well with others because he appreciated and appealed to what links us all. When I think of this, I hear his rallying cries, Thad beating the drum, Thad parading down Park Avenue, Thad patriarch of the community and his family, Thad at the helm of Rollins College for a time, or Thad in retirement, giving Jimmy Carter a run for his money, and Thad the teacher, connecting with his students, especially Thad the teacher of poetry. Poetry was the cause of my first acquaintance with Thad and Polly Seymour. It was years ago. I had never even been to Central Florida. I was giving a reading at Valencia College. And it was later reported to me by someone sitting right behind the Seymours that they seemed to know some of my poems very well, some even by heart. That reliable source is now my wife, Susanna, class of '02. For Thad and Polly, poetry was a companion, a source of delight, and even a sustenance. William Carlos Williams wrote, "Men die miserably every day for lack of what is found in poetry." But Thad Seymour was not one of those men. He died suffused with poetry. Now, because of Thad and Polly's passion for poetry, and because I have a weakness for it myself, I will conclude by reading two short poems, A Dust of Snow by Robert Frost, and a poem of mine called The Dead, both of which Thad knew well. I should warn you that you may experience a sudden drop in altitude as we move from the Frost poem to mine. And I hope I'm not going over by reading these, but remember, you got a whole free hour last night, so just consider it a little part of that extra time. This is the very short Frost poem about a moment that improved him. It's called The Dust of Snow. The way a crowd shook down on me, a dust of snow from a hemlock tree, has given my heart a change of mood and saved some part of a day I had rued. Perfect. And my poem is called The Dead. And I wrote it after a funeral in which many of the speakers referred to the deceased as looking down on us and being so pleased to see us all gathered. And I wondered, as if you have to begin the afterlife by taking attendance at your own funeral, but that angle produced the poem, The Dead. The dead are always looking down on us, they say, while we are putting on our shoes or making a sandwich. They are looking down through the glass-bottom boats of heaven as they rowed themselves slowly through eternity. They watch the tops of our heads moving below on earth, and when we lie down in a field or on a couch, drugged perhaps by the hum of a warm afternoon, they think we are looking back at them, which makes them lift their oars and fall silent and wait like parents for us to close our eyes. Thaddeus Seymour, rest in peace.
We will now have words of tribute by Barbara Harold-Child, and then that will be followed by another musical meditation.
Has it occurred to you that Thad took just a little while to find his true calling? At least one he could stick to. After receiving his PhD, he taught in college for 5 years or so, and he seemed to be on the right track. Then he took a detour, as they say, to explore other options. So he became a full-time magician and juggler, pulling surprises out of his sleeves and keeping dozens of plates in the air in Hanover, in Crawfordsville, and finally in Winter Park. But that old call to teaching was a strong one. So after Thad left the president's office at Rollins, he walked over to the English department and asked if he could step back into the classroom. Well, most of us figured that he was going to be a short timer. He would ease into retirement by taking on a few cushy advanced seminar classes, sort of the academic version of being a gentleman farmer. Little did we know that Thad was beginning a career that would run for 15 years, longer than any other job he ever took on. And there was nothing cushy about the way he did it. Instead of that sparsely populated advanced seminar, which we offered him, he chose teaching's toughest gig, freshman writing at 8 o'clock in the morning. The students came grumbling a bit at first, but they stayed to love it. Before long, that first thing in the morning class had a hefty wait list, students vying to get close to the magic of Thad's teaching. In those early years as a Rollins professor, he also allowed himself to be recruited as the master learner in a program we had back then, where a professor took 3 academic classes along with 15 or so freshman students. The idea was that the master learner would serve as a model for the freshmen by doing all the work assigned in class, homework, papers, even exams. Thad was braver than most of us who accepted this master learning challenge. He signed up for a community of learners that had a real chemistry class. No chemistry for poets for him. He sweated through the course with his fellow students. He earned a B, as he proudly said, that replaced the F he got at Princeton, which, as I understood, accounted for his moving to finish his bachelor's degree in California. We can imagine the lessons he taught his students in the process. The value of persistence and hard work were surely part of the mix, but having fun while you did it was definitely there. And my, did Thad have fun, even as his portfolio in teaching expanded. He agreed to be the coordinator of a fledgling program at Rollins that was designed to ease incoming students into the academic life. And so in that capacity, Thad hustled the merchants on Park Avenue so that he could make up a little booklet with coupons, good for a free ice cream here or a discounted sandwich there. And every student who came to Rollins received one of those in their first year. He made sure that students knew the history of the Walk of Fame, the location of Hamilton Holt's Peace Prize, plaque. He took them to the Art Museum and to the lookout at the top of the chapel. He told them about the near scandal that Ernest Hemingway's sister had stirred up while she was at Rollins. He got Rollins students involved in building a habitat house. He took his classes canoeing and bowling. He invited them to his home for lakeside poetry readings. And when they studied Zora Neale Hurston, he made sure they visited Eatonville. And he made darn sure they got an ice cream cone at that little parlor in Eatonville where the ice cream flavors were island. But above all, Thaddeus Seymour taught. The class he came to be totally identified with was literature and experience. It was an introductory class for non-majors. This was the class where Thaddeus the Great performed his greatest magic, this time transforming lives. The words of his students from that era are moving tributes to Thad's powers. Here's some from the evaluations of the day. Dr. Seymour is the most genuine, sincere, caring individual I have ever met. He is prepared, interesting, and always cheerful day in and day out. He came to class whistling, they noted. He's brilliant. Another said, he teaches with his heart. And then there was this one, I actually learned how to look past the words on a piece of paper and actually had feelings for what I read. And then, speaking of Thad's power to transform lives, another student said, I think I'm more introspective now. Dr. Seymour drove me to notice and appreciate the small things in life. And then, changing metaphors just a little bit, there was a student who said he wouldn't drag us through the lesson, he would take us by the hand and walk with us so we fully understood the material. Again, he is such an inspiration to me. To love and live so much is fabulous. He opened us all up to it, to think more and to do more. And then there was the one who said, he challenged me to live each day like it was the last and learn as much as possible. And then finally, maybe the summary comment, what can you say about Dr. Seymour? He is one of the most incredible people in the entire world. And this week, the internet has just been alive with messages from these students, now 14 or 29 years older, grieving the loss of their teacher and friend and describing ways he continues to affect their lives. He is still, they wrote again and again, their dust of snow. He was that for his colleagues, too. A gracious, smiling presence, whistling his way across campus on that bike with the handlebar bell shaped like a hamburger. Of course, it was a gift from a student. He'd peek into our offices and ask if we had just a moment. He said, and you remember this, it'll only take 3 minutes. And then he'd riffle through his backpack and pull out a poem that he had just discussed with his students. And then, after he'd read it, he would invariably say, isn't that something? Loving the words, loving his students, loving life. While Dust of Snow became Thad's signature poem, I think many of us thought he wrote it. He often gave out cards like this. It's in Abigail's handwriting, and It has dust of snow on one side, and on the other side is a passage from the play Our Town. You'll remember the part it comes from. Emily has died giving birth, and she's been allowed to return home briefly from the Hilltop Cemetery in Grover's Corners. When she gets there, she looks at all the heedless life going on in her family's kitchen, and she exclaims, "Oh, Earth, you're too wonderful for anyone to realize you. Do any human beings ever realize life while they live it, every minute?" And there's a pause, and the stage manager says, "No. The saints and poets, maybe, they do some." And I feel we could add to that. A few magician teachers do too, those of the Merlin Brotherhood, the ones who look at life and exclaim, "Isn't that something?" Thaddeus Seymour, you have been something.
Our next words of tribute will come from Madeline G. Seymour and Thad Seymour Jr. This will be followed by Amazing Grace, the hymn on the back of your bulletins.
Today we've heard from friends of Thaddeus's, sharing stories of his extensive and robust accomplishments and dedication to this Winter Park community and beyond. But I have the distinct pleasure of giving you a brief glimpse into the magic that is Grandpa Thaddeus. Grandma Polly and Thaddeus have 11 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren. We have Isabel, Margaret, TG, Nate, Annabelle, Walton, Ben, Gabe, Joaquin, Lila Mae, Jack, and Ruby Jean. Of our rowdy crowd, I am absolutely the least qualified to be up here, but to get your voice heard, you really have to weasel your way in. Grandpa Thaddeus and Grandma Polly always sought to create a world of magic and adventure for their grandkids. They conjured up extensive treasure hunts that spanned the entire neighborhood of their Winter Park home, one of which even involved the Winter Park Police Department's help to solve the mystery. There was not a sleepover or holiday with family that did not morph into talent shows, magic shows, Indiana Jones marathons, or the creation of our very own feature films. Wonder and awe were never lacking at Grandma Polly and Grandpa Thaddeus's house. When I was a young girl, Thaddeus put on his jacket and tie, picked me up in the family 1929 Packard, and accompanied me to the American Girl doll tea party at the Winter Park Library. He was the only man in the room, indifferent to the newest doll fashions, I'm sure, but blissfully intent on creating magic for his granddaughter, and I was the luckiest date. Thaddeus excelled in many aspects of his life, but grandfather, A+. A man of mystery and enchantment, a man of poetry, a man of grace, and a man of love in the purest form. The late Mary Duffy Seymour, Thad and Polly's daughter, and my cousin Gabe's mother, wrote a beautiful poem that our family would like to share with you today. And as I read this, I know Grandpa Thaddeus and Aunt Mary are holding hands, looking over us, grinning ear to ear together again. My father teaches poetry to yawn-eyed college students who think T.S. Eliot is some kind of department store. He captures their attention with the skill of a magician. Now you see it, now you don't, teaching them the fleeting ways of symbol and metaphor. My father didn't read poetry until later in his life, when the solid stomp of prose finally failed to rouse him. He sought out a frailer form, whisked and condensed, fraught, metered, and sly, with new gathered understanding that life was knowable as light. My father sends poetry to his friends and children, letting the words of Whitman, Frost, Collins, Dickinson speak the meter of his heart, the depth and breadth of feelings too precious to commit to ordinary words. My father is poetry, as he rises each day, beginning fresh stanzas without regretful glance, at limping rhymes or scuttled lines, moving forward with the measured speed of a life lived, graced with the language of joy.
Before I begin, on behalf of my mother Polly and the whole Seymour family, I'd like to express our thanks to Katrina, to Hal, to Billy, and Barbara for their kind words. And we would especially like to thank Grant and Peg Cornwell, Lori Kyle, John Sinclair, and the entire Rollins family for their kindness and their generous help in planning this beautiful service. In appreciation for this, this may look like a UCF tie, but today this is Rollins gold. And thank you, Maddie, for your words and for sharing Mary's poem so beautifully. Mary was so right. My father was poetry. And as she concluded so correctly, he moved forward with the measured speed of life lived, graced with the language of joy. As my brother Sam and I can attest, there were a few occasions growing up when the two of us invited other than joyful language from our dad. But otherwise, he gifted our family, and I suspect many of you, with the language of joy. Our family has been thinking and laughing a lot this last week about what some of the grandchildren in our family call Thadisms, his unique language that captured the spirit and the true joy of the man. It's a long list, but I'd like to share 4 of them with you. What was your best thing today? The asking of this question was a standing ritual at our dinner table in the 1960s and early 70s. Many of you will recall that these were some of the darkest years in our nation's history, colored by the tragedy of the Vietnam War and Cold War fears expressed in school air raid drills and hardened fallout shelters. College campuses where we lived wrestled with these forces more than anywhere. But in the midst of that environment, every one of my siblings experienced the genuineness of our parents' question around the dinner table. What was your best thing today? We knew that no matter how trivial or mundane our best thing might have been, it mattered to our parents. And that, despite the complex world roiling out there, things were going to be okay. Later in my life, my dad adopted Robert Frost's Dust of Snow as a way to express best things. But it was the same idea. Thank you, Dad, for helping us always look for the good that this world has to offer, even when it can sometimes be very hard to find. Now this is big. There isn't a Seymour child, grandchild, or great-grandchild who doesn't smile when they think of Thaddeus saying this in his big booming voice and with this convincing finger wag that usually way overstated whatever he was talking about. Exhibit A was the Eggstractor, a cheap plastic device that Thaddeus found somewhere on a home shopping network or online. And it was purported to peel a hard-boiled egg perfectly every single time. So buying a dozen of these with free shipping and handling made perfect sense to him to be sure that every one of the grandchildren was covered with this latest technological marvel. Of course, they never worked. But because Thaddeus had insisted that this is big, no one ever doubted that someday they might work. So thank you, Grandpa Thaddeus, for the eternal optimism and enthusiasm that you passed along to your family and to everyone you ever encountered. Another one. Whatever you do, don't panic. See? Dad would invoke this phrase whenever we were faced with a situation where the outcome was uncertain. It was used, for example, when he and our son Thad were on top of the garage installing a new basketball hoop, and the backboard and my dad began to slide slowly down the roof. Or years ago when we were on a camping trip and the car and trailer brakes gave out coming down Mount Evans in Colorado. Whatever you do, don't panic. But he added, Polly, would you jump out of the car and find a rock you can put under the wheel to slow us down? She did, and it worked. Actually, 3 generations of Seymours thought that don't panic was directed at each of us until more recently, Polly explained to the grandkids that Thaddeus was actually really trying to convince himself not to panic. Dad, thank you for helping us seek out life's adventures and for teaching us how to be calm in the storm when things don't go exactly as planned. Whatever you do, don't panic. The last phrase is a little different from the others. Dad was big on tradition. He loved family gatherings, and he made each and every one of those count. He would lead our family prayer before dinner, including as we stood holding hands around the big Thanksgiving table for our annual extended family gathering. His prayer always varied slightly, including acknowledging the welcome presence of new friends or guests and appreciating the hard work of those who had prepared the meal. But he always ended the prayer the same way. Above all, we pray for a world at peace. In every decade of his life, those words were aimed at a different source of discord or conflict in the world. But he never stopped praying for peace. And he never stopped acting on his hope for peace in big ways and small that each of us here has experienced in one way or another. And I think that may be the most important legacy that he left his family and all of those he touched. Dad, thank you for teaching us that we have a responsibility to leave this world better than it was before, as you did. Above all, we pray for a world at peace. Could I ask you to take the hand of the person sitting next to you and join me in expressing my dad's wish for our world as we say, above all, we pray for a world at peace. Amen. Thank you.
Before I get to the benediction, just a few quick announcements. So what is going to happen is I'm going to give the benediction, and I'm going to ask that you all just remain seated for a little bit longer because the choir has something else prepared, and which they will sing at that point. So following this, though, I ask that there'll be an organ recessional, and I ask that after that you give the family a few minutes to get themselves in terms of out of the chapel and heading toward Rice Pavilion. Now, you're going to be in for a treat because what's going to happen, so we know that Thad, this is a celebration of life, right? Correct? All right, this is a celebration of life. So what we are going to do is celebrate in a very special way. If you look in your program following the recessional, you're going to have 2 Rollins College student guides, and you're going to have a little traveling music. It's going to be celebratory, so you're going to be able to travel. So we're going to ask that you give the family a few moments to get themselves out and about, all right? And then if you can all just be able to follow the 2 student guides, and we're going to celebrate. And you will see why when you get out these doors of what a celebration it will be. The family has asked me to read a very special benediction. Creator of all, we pray to you for Thaddeus Seymour and for all those whom we love but see no longer. Grant them eternal rest. Let perpetual light shine upon them. May his soul and the souls of all departed, through the mercy of God, rest in peace.